Hi, and welcome to another show. This is Preparing for the Unexpected, and I'm your host, Alex Fullick. Today, we're going to talk about fire services and all the aspects that relate to fire hazardous materials, how you store your barbecues, evacuations. We're going to talk about a lot of different things, and we'll see where it takes us as we go along. I have a wonderful guest today. Actually, he's local for where I live in the city of Guelph, Ontario, Canada. He is the Chief Fire Prevention Officer. I hope I got the title right. Mr. Tony Sabatini. Tony, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Alex, for having me.
Did I get the title right?
I think you did. Yes, absolutely. I am the Chief Fire Prevention Officer for the City of Guelph Fire Department.
Oh, wonderful. I thought there were multiple people, but I've got the top guy here. This is great.
Well, I guess you have one of the top guys for one of the divisions, I guess.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, they're not on the show. We'll say we got the top guy.
Oh, well, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
So let's get started. Exactly what can you define for our listeners? Because they're around the globe. We've got everybody listening in. What is fire services? What's the role of fire services? When people say fire services, what should they really understand? It's not just a fire truck going down the street.
Right, and I think you've brought upon a good point. I think the average person, when they hear the term fire services, all they really recognize is a large truck, whether it be red or yellow, screaming down with sirens, and you have men and women jumping off, and they're pulling out a hose and just putting a fire out with flames coming out of a window. And that's generally what people would associate with fire services. But in actual fact, fire services encompasses a heck of a lot more. Firstly, yes, there is fire suppression, whereby you have firefighters that actually put fires out, but they also effectuate rescues in buildings in the event that there is a fire, or in the event that there may be a spill of a type of a hazardous liquid, or it could be smoke filled with a small fire. They effectuate the rescue. Fire services also involve firefighters going to incidents such as car accidents or explosions, and they assist with crowd movement away from a danger zone, and they also effectuate a rescue. They incorporate also high-level first aid, called first responder first aid, whereby they assist people with medical emergencies. They're usually first on, along with paramedics that are there, to which many fire services have people that are trained as paramedics as well. So they do that as well. And the fire services also breaks down not only to the incident or the reactionary measures when an actual emergency occurs, but also the preventative side, to which you would have a fire prevention bureau. And this is pretty well standard with all types of fire departments, pretty well worldwide, and certainly in first world countries mostly. And those fire prevention divisions or fire prevention bureaus that deal with that component of the fire service are generally dealing with code enforcement to make sure that the minimum levels of life and fire safety are met in buildings for the occupants. They also conduct public fire safety education in the form of presentations or in the form of teaching. And they also conduct, in many cases, fire investigations to determine the origin cause of fires, to verify that once they're able to obtain that origin and cause, that it doesn't happen again, so that codes and standards eventually can be changed once they have all that data. As well, there's the training aspect, which trains firefighters and also trains people in the fire prevention divisions or bureaus in order for these individuals to be at the top of their profession, to make sure that they are actually dealing with everything that they are responsible for at the highest level.
Wow. That's so much more than a red truck going down the street.
Absolutely,
with sirens blaring. You touched on quite a few different things there. So let's start going through some of what you brought up and flesh out some more information for people. You meant the training one I really like. Because the training isn't just, from my perspective, isn't just for the firefighters themselves. It's for people that work in offices, or maybe, to me, I could be wrong, people that live in homes and, facilities, how to evacuate people. Does it incorporate those kind of things, and what people should do? Because when something occurs, you guys aren't there right away.
Absolutely right. And you've touched upon a very important component about fire safety. And one of the tasks that we have is not only educating people on how to prepare for a fire emergency, an unanticipated fire emergency, but also the preventative aspect. So looking at preparation, for example, if you were to look at outside of the home at this particular moment, if we were to look at an industry, or we were to look at a large-scale office building, or even a small office building, in many cases here in the province of Ontario, and I think you'll find this even throughout the United States and in places in Europe and other areas around the world, that there are requirements for fire safety planning. And fire safety planning encompasses not only how people should evacuate, because once you indicate to someone, and generally the impression in people's minds is a fire safety plan is just a document that's plastered on a wall, indicating that if the alarm bells ring, for example, if there's a fire alarm system, that they're to exit the closest door to get out of a building. A fire safety plan actually entails what specific staff members who are responsible for the people in the building are to do in the event that there is a fire, which is help directing them out. So we try to teach that component as well. What we would also do is talk about the preventative maintenance in terms of whether there be a fire alarm system, or if we're talking about a home, a smoke alarm. There are preventative measures that are in accordance to local, provincial, even state regulations that must be maintained so that they're always in working order, because those are the alerting devices or the suppression devices that in the event that there is a fire, people know what to do in terms of not only escaping, but actually how to deal with a particular situation, especially if there are others in there. So yes, there is that preparatory component. The difficulty, though, that is happening out there, because people don't truly understand what it is that they are to do, and it's of no fault of their own. They're just uninitiated, and this is one of the tasks that most fire departments are trying to do, is that we're trying to train them that there are specific responsibilities to be taken into account so that they can escape a fire incident or a tragic fire incident that may occur, so that they actually leave unscathed or unharmed. Having said that, there are also the preventative measures to actually have components in place legally and otherwise, so that these particular issues do not occur, so that they are not confronted with an actual fire occurrence, and they don't have to worry about injuries due to fires, because everything they have in place is in proper functioning order.
So does that include things like testing, that everything works, that it runs to what they expect? Because coming from my background with business continuity and disaster recovery planning, a lot of times we are sitting there making these plans and saying, this is what you'll do. But is it better for us to actually reach out to fire services to get their advice on what we should have in these plans?
Absolutely. We would encourage anyone out there who wants that type of assistance to reach out to any of their local fire departments for their assistance, because that is a component of what we do. As a matter of fact, just in the province of Ontario, speaking here, we have a legislative obligation to assist people with public fire safety education and other fire prevention measures. This is one of those other fire prevention measures, to assist them in preparing a plan that is to be put into practice. And it's different when you have a plan on paper, as you well know in your profession, but to actually have it in effect where you actually practice it, which is really important, so that when it's in practice, then you know exactly what to do given a particular circumstance if it were to occur. So you're absolutely correct in that. And that would involve, as you've stated earlier, about testing, say, an alarm system, which is not only a requirement, not only here in the province of Ontario, but elsewhere. It is just testing a smoke alarm, verifying a sprinkler system, for example, if one is installed, is in working order, verifying that you have, standpipe hoses, where you see the hoses in the wall, that they are actually maintained. There are legislative requirements to maintain those. So in the event that they're needed to be used, that they will function in as intended, based on how they are to operate. So yes, these are the components that if people were to reach out, we can assist them on, and we must, at least here in the province of Ontario, must assist them on in terms of making sure that they are prepared.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good, because I like I said, I know I've sat in a room and people have said, well, this is what we'll do, and I know that some of it we probably got right, but we also need to make sure that, but are we meeting other people's expectations? With fire services, are we doing what they expect? Which leads me to the question, when firefighters and everyone involved gets on the scene, what is it you expect from us? Because you may get there and there's people all over the place, and you may see a dozen people with, neon colored vests or something. They were the facility fire wardens, but I don't think you would appreciate 12 different people rushing up to you and telling you tons and tons of stuff. What do you expect when you get on the scene? How should places communicate?
Right, that's an excellent point that you've brought up, Alex. In terms of communicating to an on-scene incident commander, which would either be a platoon chief or a captain that comes on scene first, what usually happens? I would like for your listeners to know that when a fire service member or a truck of firefighters actually approaches the scene, there is a myriad of concerns in the mind. There's the pre-planning stage of how to address a situation, especially if there's a fire or in the event that there may be a fire. And yes, there are individuals exiting the building. Here's the key. If individuals are exiting the building and they're exiting quickly, it seems that they're going in accordance not only to their own personal safety, but probably according to the plan that's been established. Now, you'll see people with vests, as you've indicated. It is always important that only one person be appointed to come to the incident commander to indicate to that individual, perhaps if someone is still in the building, or to indicate that everyone has been evacuated from the building, perhaps the location of a fire incident, or if in fact there were a flammable liquid that were spilled somewhere and it's actually wreaking havoc among individuals if they were to breathe it in. So yes, you're absolutely right. When you have all these people with vests, yes, they have delegated responsibilities, but it's always a good rule of thumb to only have one individual approach, because when you have several, it can get so confusing that in the actual situation that is occurring, because it's very confusing, that the incident commander may have to neglect what's being said and just deal with the issues at hand and just and address it as best as it can. But having just the one individual approach, an actual supervisory staff member who has that responsibility to indicate that information to the incident commander, which would be a platoon chief or a captain, that would be of great assistance to us, because then we can plan differently based on that information that is being provided, because that information is crucial to the incident commander and how he's going to strategically plan how he's either going to fight a fire, evacuate a building, effectuate a rescue, and a myriad of other things.
Because if you get a bunch of people saying the same thing, there's somebody still in there, or not, because maybe one of those 12 people with the vest doesn't know there's somebody in there, you may send your people in, unnecessarily to areas that, don't need the attention, right?
Absolutely
it can cause
correct.
Confusion. Yeah.
Yes.
Who, in your estimation, who do you think is the best person to be that single contact? Like the facility manager, what qualifications should that person be? So that organizations out there identify the right person.
Right. If we're just strictly speaking as who would be the individual, would be the person who's best trained in dealing with that area of potential incident. And it could be a health and safety committee member that may have been appointed that. Here in Ontario, when we're speaking specifically with fire safety and someone being appointed, they use the terminology supervisory staff. Supervisory staff is a defined term in the Ontario Fire Code. It's also in the National Fire Code of Canada. And that it just indicates a person who has the delegated responsibility for fire safety. That is a responsibility that comes from a company owner or a homeowner or a building owner. That's the individual who assigns that specific responsibility. It is in the best interests that that person be as well trained in that area of a concern to deal with all those matters. And that would be the individual that would come to an incident commander to indicate what problems may be there, where the people have mustered, for example, at a location away from the building, and other information that may be needed or gleaned from the actual incident commander from that individual. So who's the best person? It's the person who's best trained, would be what we would like to see. The Ontario Fire Code, along with the National Fire Code, speaks to just a specific person who's responsible. And the intention is the person who is the most trained for it, such as a facility supervisor, if that individual has taken it upon him or herself to be that individual.
Well, that's good to know, because I remember an instance a couple of years back. We had a fire drill, and a fire department came on board, and we had a designated person to speak with the fire service. I would assume it was the fire chief who was there, and all of a sudden the C-level, chief information officer walked up and said, "I'm in charge," and yet they weren't the one who had all the training. So It was kind of interesting that your description, it's the best trained person, not just by title.
Correct. It's the best trained person and a person who has taken on that responsibility to be in that role as well. We would love to see the person who's best trained. And that certainly goes back to the education component, the training component, certainly the work that you do, any outreach to us as a public service for us to assist. We have to get the best individuals that are trained. Yes, you're absolutely correct. It's the best trained person. It doesn't necessarily mean a position within a company. And it could very well be that person in that position if they are the ones that are trained.
Right. Yeah. Just to clarify that, it doesn't mean the CIO isn't trained.
Right.
But
Exactly.
Just because they have that title doesn't mean they are automatically, know everything, so to speak, and can run the situation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Great. And on that note, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Mr. Tony Sabatini, the Chief Fire Prevention Officer here in the city of Guelph. And welcome back to Preparing for the Unexpected. We're talking with Mr. Tony Sabatini, the Chief Fire Prevention Officer here in the city of Guelph, where I live. So I really appreciate having local talent on the show today. We're learning and talking about fire services and fire prevention. And Tony, I'd like to talk about what we should do around our homes, and our offices. I know with offices we talked about evacuation plans, but what about our homes? What do we need to do? We have so many different kinds of homes now. We have high rises and 3-story walk-ups and stacked condo buildings and semi-detached and all these different homes. And I don't think one plan fits everything. What do you suggest that we all should do around the home? If unfortunately we have a fire or a situation, what do we need to do at home?
Right. I think this is highly important because statistically speaking, anywhere from 70 to 80% of all fires do occur in the home, regardless of where that home is. It can be in an apartment. It can be in a single detached home. It can be in a condo. It could be in another type of building where a residence has been formed. So regardless of what you call home, regardless if it's a high-rise, regardless if it's a house, regardless if it's a condo, the Ontario Fire Code, for example, which sets a minimum standard, and the National Fire Code also, which is a model code which sets a minimum standard for safety, speaks to people in the home as well. One of the key components of failure that we find in almost every fire whereby it happens in a home and there is either injury or death is non-working smoke alarms. The law is replete with indicating that smoke alarms must be installed in a home, and in most cases on every level. So let's assume you had someone in Florida that doesn't have a basement, they just have a small bungalow, for example. At least one smoke alarm on that level that is working will allow that person an opportunity to escape from a fire that occurs relatively unscathed. Now, regardless of what you call home, the smoke alarms are of vital importance. But here's the thing, just having an installed smoke alarm doesn't necessarily mean that it will assist an individual unless it's fully functioning. And it almost sounds elementary when we try to explain this, whenever we try to put it out there in certain outreach programs that most fire services do, whether it be through media, whether it be through other forms of, whether it be just in general communication. Working smoke alarms, whether they be battery operated or not, are the key to assisting people in escaping a fire. most of the fires, statistically speaking, are happening at night. So having working smoke alarms is key. I know I'm belaboring this point, but it is so important to have on every level of the home. So if you have a 2-story home, have at least 2. If you have a 3-story home, have at least 3. If you have just a 1-story or just a small apartment, have 1, regardless of where it is. Now, with that, just having a working smoke alarm isn't enough. You must have an escape plan. And here it is. A lot of children actually learn this in school. They will develop an escape plan, and it's basically a schematic diagram that they actually draw in school, which is a blueprint of their home. And what they do is they know they have to have it. They actually put together ways to get out. Generally, we say at least 2 ways out. Okay, so at least having a one-way out and a secondary way out that for people to escape. So that plan, although it's in place, and I think we discussed it even in the earlier segment, yeah, it's great to have a plan in written form. But if it's not practiced, how do you know it's going to be effective? So smoke alarms that work on every level of the home, regardless of how many levels you have, having an escape plan that's practiced while you test your smoke alarm. We would strongly recommend you test the smoke alarms every month to verify it's working. It's very simple to do. You just press the test button that's on the smoke alarms, which virtually all smoke alarms have. And now there is the carbon monoxide alarms that we're trying to get people, which is already legislated in Ontario and in other provinces and in the U.S., to have carbon monoxide alarms in the home as well. Because the way homes are being built today, they're actually pretty efficient in terms of allowing air to escape or come in, and they're very airtight for that efficiency, for heat, for coolness, that you want to have a working carbon monoxide alarm as well. So here it is, working smoke alarms, and you must have an escape plan both in combination. If you can practice it, I can almost guarantee that you will have yourselves very safe condition, as safe as can be, given an anticipated fire event.
So what happens if you're, I'll use actually my situation right here.
Sure.
I live in a stacked condo, and I've got the top 1.5 floors, and there's 2 floors, 1.5 floors below me. So I've got 3 balconies, but only 1 entrance. And now if the fire is down there, what do I do? How do I get out? What suggestions do you have for me? Because I've actually been thinking about this in the last couple of weeks, in anticipation of the show.
Right. You've posited a great question. Now, I know of the type of building in which you live, and yes, there's only one way out. And that was permitted by building code, which is a minimum standard. So what do you do in a case like that? You've indicated that you have a balcony. This is critically important, and I'm glad you brought this up, Alex. So here it is. In the event that a fire were to occur, and your one way out, which is the door to get out, is completely blocked with smoke or heat, and there's just no possible way that you can escape that way, regardless of the fact that you have your working smoke alarms and you have an escape plan. What would be the secondary way out? There isn't one, but there is something you can do. You have the balcony. Now, historically, balconies, especially in high-rise buildings, balconies were actually inputted as a place for people to have refuge in the event they couldn't escape. What happens in that respect is if you have yourself in the balcony where you're outside, where you can get fresh air, regardless of the weather conditions, at least you have fresh air and you're away from that toxic smoke, and you're able to put the call in for help, which in many cases people have cellular telephones or data phones, put the call in for help by dialing 911, indicating where your location is. That will be our first point of entry to help with the rescue of that individual who is trapped on that balcony. So you have a balcony, that's where you position yourself. Assuming that you live in a place that doesn't have a balcony, we would suggest going to the safest, furthest room from where the fire incident is, shutting the doors because that'll maintain the heat and toxic smoke from coming in, going to a window, opening it up for fresh air, and again, putting in that call for help by calling 911, indicating your location, and that will be the first point of contact for firefighters to come and help rescue you.
Thank you. Now I have a home plan.
Oh, that's great to hear.
Because I was wondering about that. I wasn't sure. If I stand out there? What do I do? I only have the one entrance because there is a building here on the balcony. They've got it looks like a collapsible ladder to get down.
Right. Well,
are those? Actually, do you recommend those? As
absolutely.
A backup?
absolutely. Those are called escape ladders, and we do recommend those for folks that either live in something that's more than just a main level, or if you have a second or third level. If we just took an individual dwelling, for example, that's 2.5 stories high, if you have a bedroom upstairs, for example, or regardless of what you use it upstairs for, having one of these escape ladders, which should be listed, and when I use the term listed, that they are either been tested by a nonprofit agency such as the Underwriter Laboratories of Canada or CSA, Canadian Standards Association here in Canada, UL in the U.S., and Werner Kersey in the U.S. If you have one of those ladders, which is an escape ladder, they're collapsible, and you can't get out any other way, and that fire is screaming from downstairs coming up and you can't escape, those ladders actually hook onto a windowsill, and you can actually climb down this ladder and be safe right at ground level. So yes, if at all possible, if budgets permit for folks, if they can have one of these collapsible fire escape ladders and they can place them, now they're not going to do much good if you leave them on downstairs in a bathroom somewhere, but if you place them upstairs in an area where you know you need to use them, then yes, that would be a good way to escape. Of course, it would be your last means. It wouldn't be your first choice. If you can get out the front door, that's the safest way. But if it becomes blocked with smoke and heat and you cannot escape that way, the escape ladder is a great alternative.
I think I'll look into one of those.
Yeah.
You mentioned the fire extinguishers. Extinguishers. I'll get to that one in a moment.
Yeah,
the fire alarms. Testing them. How often should we do that? I've heard different thoughts on when that should occur.
Right, and I'm assuming you're speaking about fire alarms in buildings, or are you talking about the smoke alarms in the homes?
Actually, it could be both. Why not address both? Let's do the homes first.
Absolutely. So let's start with the home ones. Home ones, you're talking about your smoke alarms and your carbon monoxide alarms.
Right.
So it is recommended, now this is a recommendation, that you test them once a month, just to verify that they're working. There's an actual test button that's on a smoke alarm. All you do is press the test button to verify that it works. Now, what that test button does on a smoke alarm is only tests the sound. Are you sure that it will work for smoke? Well, although we don't try to present this to children or adolescents, if by chance you have a guardian or an adult supervising, the way you can test it with smoke is either do what's called a cotton burn string test. And that's pretty well of a weird phrase, but what it is, if you get a cotton string, you just light it with a lighter, blow it out quickly, and bring that cotton string that has the smoke that's emanating upwards towards the chamber to verify that it will sound the alarm. You will have 100% guarantee that that smoke will have activated that smoke alarm. That's one way to verify that that smoke alarm actually functions for you. Another way, you can purchase online these simulated smoke sprays that can also do the trick as well. They're a little bit more costly, of course, than a cotton burn string, but much more in the safe region than actually lighting a fire or a small flame to have the smoke actually activate. So that's the best way to test. If you don't have that or you feel uncomfortable, by testing it with the test button, that test feature will assure you that even in a smoke condition, it will operate. So that's your smoke alarm. Carbon monoxide, the only way you can test carbon monoxide alarms is by pressing the test button. If you press it, it will sound. If it sounds, you know it's functioning. So once a month. Now with fire alarm systems, you will notice that there are some buildings that have fire alarm systems, others don't. That's because by design, some are required to have them, some are not. But the ones that do, by law, they must be fully tested once a year by a certified fire alarm technician. That is a requirement by law, at least in this province. I know that it's also a requirement by law in many other areas throughout North America, and I have a feeling in some areas in Europe as well. But regardless, if they don't have such a thing, at least once a year to do a full test of a fire alarm system. It is also recommended at least every month or every 3 months to test a fire alarm system to verify that it is functioning. So we know that the fire alarm system is working. Well, we also try to advise individuals, if you're testing your fire alarm system with a fire alarm tech, for example, why not try to parlay that into your fire safety plan to see how your escape happens with everyone in the building, if it's permissible, of course, with the company. So yes, once a year for a fire alarm system for a full-fledged test. We also recommend that on a monthly or every 3 months. But when you're talking about the home, every month on the smoke alarm.
So any recommendations on changing batteries? Either every spring or just if people forget.
You're absolutely right. And the National Fire Protection Association, which is a standard-setting body that provides advisement throughout the entirety of North America, strongly recommends that you change batteries in smoke alarms if you have a battery-operated smoke alarm once yearly. Here in the province of Ontario, we strongly recommend doing it twice yearly, every 6 months. And we try to do it at a time where people can recall when to do it. So whenever fall comes up, which unfortunately within about a month or so, in October, when we have to change our clocks back, that's when we recommend to change the batteries if you have battery-operated smoke alarms. And in the spring, when we change the clocks back to forward, we recommend also the exchange of the batteries and to verify that those batteries are in optimal condition to activate your smoke alarms.
Well, I actually change mine every fall, and I always know when my fire alarm works because every time I make raisin toast, my alarm goes off. So I know it works here.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. You bring up a point there about some of these smoke alarms. I'm sorry, I don't mean to disrupt you there, but you talk about smoke alarms, and sometimes they activate when people are toasting bread. And
it does every time. Not regular bread, just raisin toast.
Right, well, raisin toast, yes. And I love raisin toast, by the way. So having said that, though, what happens is, people become so accustomed to that sound, some people actually take the batteries out because they're just so annoyed by it. Not only are they accustomed, they're annoyed by it. If they're accustomed to it, they just won't respond. If they're annoyed by it, they may try to disengage the mechanism. So we've had concerns with people doing that. So what would that poses a significant challenge, because what happens in the middle of the night if that person doesn't put back the smoke alarm battery, or if they've disengaged the alarm and it's not working and there's an actual fire? What happens in that respect? So we may have a person trapped there, or worse, someone injured or dying. So what we try to tell people is, if you have the type of smoke alarm that just activates on practically anything, even after taking a shower, well, one of the options would be to replace that smoke alarm with another type. There are two types. There's the ionization smoke alarm, which usually activates on fast, quick fires with very little smoke, and they activate right away. And then there's the photoelectric alarm, which usually activates on more smoldering type fires, which means you won't have all those nuisance alarms for when you're toasting your raisin bread, for example. So if that's the case, and you've become so accustomed either to hearing the sound and you're not, responding to it in a way that would be safe if you had to escape, or if you find yourself that individual just trying to take out that battery, which you shouldn't be doing, I would strongly recommend that you change that type of smoke alarm to one that's a photoelectric, because the law does not distinguish between which one you should have. At least by having a photoelectric, if it were to activate, at least it won't be one that activates on a constant basis, which disallows you to move or react to it. You know that if it activates, there has to be a reaction to it. So if that's the case, if you have ionization smoke alarms and they're just such a darn nuisance, then I would strongly recommend going to the photoelectric smoke alarms and having them installed instead.
Well, even though it's a nuisance, at least it lets me know that it's working at home and I'd be safe. So I can put up with that aggravation.
Yes, that's great to hear.
So on that note, we're going to take another break, and we'll be right back talking about fire services. And welcome back to Preparing for the Unexpected. We're talking with Tony Sabatini, the Chief Fire Prevention Officer here in the city of Guelph. And Tony, at the beginning of your the first segment, you mentioned the roles of fire services, and you brought up hazmat teams. Can you expand on that? The storage of gasoline cans, because I've been to the cottage, a different friend's cottage, and you see a dozen, let's say, gasoline cans lined up. How should we be storing our hazardous materials? What kind of requirements and guidelines can you give us on that?
Well, absolutely. I think the guidelines, when you're looking at especially gasoline, and I know of what you speak only because I've actually experienced it myself with others. Gasoline itself, a lot of folks like to store gasoline either in their garages, and in some cases we've seen them in basements. Here's the problem when you store any kind of volatile liquid like gasoline, kerosene, whatever the case may be. It's one of these flammable type of liquids. If in fact there's some kind of a ventilation to it, whether there's a pinprick or if the knob isn't turned tightly, what happens is these vapors, being heavier than air, will sink down to the ground. And if there's ever any kind of an ignition source, and it can be just by flicking a light, because sometimes people will flick a light in the dark, and you see that little blue flash, which really should be corrected. But you see that little blue flash, it is hot enough to ignite those flames. You can have yourself a flash fire. Depending on how enclosed you are, it could even be an explosion. So you're absolutely right. So what should people do if, in fact, they have gasoline, and especially up at the cottage or even at home? We would strongly recommend that the storage, first of all, be put in approved type of containers, like those jerry cans that people normally buy. And I think most people utilize these. Verify that they're tightly sealed when they're in the closed position, and we would strongly, strongly, strongly recommend never to place them anywhere within the home, including an attached garage. If you have a separated garage, they'd be fine to be stored there on the ground somewhere. And if you have a shed or some form of an enclosed type of cabinet, whether it be plastic or something that you normally see now that you can buy practically at any warehouse store, if you can place them outside and have them under lock key, those are the best locations. Because if you have them inside, the problem is that you have those vapors, and if they come in connection with an ignition source, then you may have a flash fire or an explosion. So absolutely having the type of gasoline or any kind of flammable liquid not to be stored. That would include also propane. People have propane barbecues. A lot of folks in the winter, because you generally don't like to barbecue in the winter, propane tanks get brought inside, and that is a huge risk by doing so. First of all, it's illegal to be storing that type of propane inside in many jurisdictions. Again, that would be something that you would want to store away from the home, anywhere that's attached to the home. And being outside is fine, as long as you lock it somewhere where it can't be accessed by ne'er-do-wells, for example, who may want to cause some kind of a problem. But in a shed or something, that is the strongest recommendation we can put forth to people when they're storing these types of items.
Oh, that's good to know. I think I'll be passing that information on to a couple of people I know.
Oh, that's great to hear. Yes, please do, sir.
Oh, I will.
Yeah.
You mentioned barbecues.
Mm-hmm.
I know from just walking around barbecues, I don't know about the rest of the world, but here in Guelph quite a bit, there's barbecues everywhere. Up against the sides of homes, against fences, in the middle of an open, field. I've seen them, in the backyard.
Right.
How should people be storing their barbecues? Because those could be dangerous too, right? Because they're hooked up to natural gas or propane tanks and, other flammable materials. What's your thought on that?
Well, yeah, actually, when you're talking about the type of and regardless of the type of barbecue that it is, it can even be a charcoal barbecue, or it can be a propane-powered barbecue, or it can be the natural gas-powered barbecue. The recommendation, and in some jurisdictions they have legal distance requirements, spatial distance requirements, we strongly recommend that you have at least 3 imperial feet away from any building opening. And in some cases, 10 feet away. But 10 feet away, especially when you have, a deck or something, it may not be possible. So we want to make sure that there's a spatial separation, at least from building openings. And when we talk about building openings, we're talking about the windows, we're talking about the doors. Because in the event you have any kind of a problem, or you might have a leak, or there's a fire that occurs, well, if you're by that door, someone could actually get burned, or it can actually blow out one of the windows if, in fact, there's actually a bit of an explosion. These rarely happen because a lot of propane type of barbecues, they're properly sealed and they're properly tested for their use, including natural gas. But yes, there always could be that potentiality that it could have a problem where you may have a fire or even an explosion for that matter. Having said that, 3 imperial feet, if you can, that's about a meter, a little bit more than a meter, 1.2 meters away from any building opening. And if you can address it, 10 feet away is the best spatial distance you can have for barbecues. So they can be effectively used, and in the event something were to happen, unanticipated of course, then you have that spatial separation where you can leave, put the call in for help via 911 here in North America, or the other emergency number elsewhere, and then you can have the fire service come in and deal with the problem. Try not to put the fire out yourself, because a lot of times when you're dealing especially with natural gas and you're dealing especially with propane, it can be very unpredictable. So that's the strongest advisement we can give. And certainly check with your local jurisdictions to see if there are legalities with respect to distance requirements for barbecues. barbecuing appliances.
You mentioned decks. Should barbecues be up against railings? Even though they're far away, let's say they are 10 feet away from the house, doors or windows, but they're up against wooden railings. Should there be space there too, or?
We would strongly recommend that as well. Now, it depends on the type of railing. You're talking about these wooden railings, and if you have, these metal, and they're all mostly, if not all, metal barbecues, and you have them against them, the type of heat that's generated, especially when you're doing, when you're using it for smoking purposes, you're smoking meat products or vegetable products, or if you're using it on high heat to cook a steak, for example. The fact is that because they're metal, they conduct heat incredibly well, and they get very hot. If they're up against the wood itself, the wood pyrolyzes, and it's a term which means it sort of breaks down. And as time goes on, the longer you have it on there, it could actually char to a point where you have some smoldering combustion. It takes a long process, a long time, but it can happen. So having it up against it, it could cause it to char. First of all, in terms of aesthetics, it's not a good thing to see. Secondly, yes, you can cause what's called pyrolysis, which breaks down that wood, and eventually it could, in time, if it's constantly being used, of course, the appliance, it could cause a fire on the wood itself. Depending how thick the wood is, it could be lattice. If it's lattice, you can actually cause a fire quite quickly. So yes, anything that's against it, I would give a spatial separation from there as well. If you could, about a foot, again, an imperial foot, if you can, about half a meter if it's possible. I would keep that spatial separation pretty well the same that you would with a door opening. If you can go 3 feet, imperial feet, that'd be great. That's roughly around 1.2 meters. That would be optimum so that you don't have any of those kinds of concerns.
So optimal is kind of on a patio, away from all the fence, away from the house, and kind of in the middle there, But
right.
Unfortunately, we don't all have that.
No, but the thing is, if you have it's a bit of space. What the space does between the appliance and anything that's made of a cellulosic fuel like wood, for example. Once you have space in there, you have heat dissipation. So chances are you're not going to have that problem where it's going to heat the wood to the point where it pyrolyzes. It takes a long time. It wouldn't happen right away. But if you have a bit of a spatial separation, there's that heat dissipation, so you wouldn't have that type of concern. A lot of folks sometimes I've seen, they put up these appliances up against some old brushes and all that, other types of boskage, foliage. That's a concern too, because that stuff can actually ignite quite quickly, especially if they're dry. So if you have a bit of space in between, that little space, even if it's, for example, because I can't regulate exactly what it must be, I can only advise that having an imperial foot, or even more so, 3 imperial feet, which is 1.2 meters, that provides enough spatial separation for heat dissipation, and you'll never have the concern of a fire starting against a fence or even some brushes.
And considering the heat we're having here in Guelph, that's good advice.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it is. I totally agree with that. Yes, absolutely.
So I'd like to, in our last the last bit of time we've got left, talk on pet safety and child safety, because on airplanes you always hear, when the masks come down, put your own on first, then take care of the child. What do you suggest, with pet care and young child care, with fire services? What should we do and plan for them?
Well, thanks for the question, Austin. You certainly asked a tough one, and I'm glad you do. So here it is, and here it is with pets. It is always recommended through any provincial fire marshal office that you are to make sure you plan to get out on your own, and that the pets themselves are to be left for firefighters to rescue. We still strongly recommend that. But here is the concern. In a lot of cases, pets are part of the family, and a lot of folks are very reluctant to escape without their pet. So what is the advice for someone like that? Well,
yes.
If you're able, we still strongly recommend that you rescue yourself and your loved ones, including children, right away. Because I will tell you this, statistics have shown that even children under the age of about 7 will react in the same way that a dog may react when it's confronted with this type of traumatic event, which is an excessive smoke, fire, smoke alarm going off in the middle of the night, whatever the case may be. So here it is. Parents would never leave their children. They will, and shouldn't really. They will go in with children who would be confronted with this traumatic event, and what they do is they initially hide. It's just an innate feature to hide away from where the danger is. Pets do the same thing, especially pets that aren't enclosed in, say, a gated area or even a cage for the time being. So we're talking about cats and dogs, and could be ferrets for that matter, depending on the pet you have. Now, what do? They hide as well. So it'd be very difficult for you to try to get this pet out when they're in that type of situation. They usually go hide in an area that's free and clear of the smoke area. That's why we recommend people to get out so we can do the rescue. But if people are reluctant, then the suggestion would be that if you have a pet, have it near an exit door or have it within your room, which a lot of folks do. I'm not trying to tell people to make sure you keep your dog or your cat in your room. But if, in fact, you have a dog or cat and it sleeps nearby you, having it in the room might be a good idea because you can quickly scoop up that pet and exit as well if you need to. So it's a very difficult question you pose. It's a very difficult answer for me to put forth for true ardent pet lovers. I'm a pet lover myself. Having said that, yeah, exactly. So I would strongly recommend you making sure you escape first and have the fire service assist with that rescue. If that's the case, if you're very reluctant, then my suggestion is, if you can, to have that pet nearby you, whether it be outside of your room or inside of a room, if you can handle it, of course, so you don't have any health issues for that, then you can actually do the escape with the pet right away, because the first thing they're going to do, including children under the age of 7 in most cases, if they're not properly trained, and in a lot of cases only because of their instinctive nature, they're going to hide away from the fire, from that traumatic event. And in a lot of cases, we found dead children because they have been hiding inside of a closet because that's the only safety net they found at that time. And that's why we strongly recommend making sure your smoke alarms are working, they're tested, and you incorporate an escape plan that you practice with your smoke alarm. I'm talking about physical practice to go outside. And if you have a pet with you and you're reluctant to leave, then have the pet escape with you. If you can grab it under your arm or carry the cage if it's a bird. It's a little bit more difficult when you're dealing with species like fish and that. In a lot of cases, if they're enclosed in a room, chances are they will be fine, depending on the type of fire. But if you have certain pets that you know you will not leave without, if they're with you at the time, especially when you're sleeping, then they can escape with you. And it's a bit of a concern that I'm bringing forward, and I know that there will be other fire service members that may decline to agree with me on that, because I certainly say that you should rescue yourself first, because that's the truth. But I know people won't. They will be reluctant. So if you have them with you, you're still able to rescue yourself and also escape with your pet, if you can.
Well, that's good advice. I have a dog myself, and I know I could never just run outside and leave him here. I know,
right.
But he sleeps in the room, with me, so I can leverage that. So
absolutely, Alex, and I'm in the same boat. I'm in the same boat exactly like you. I have a dog, and the dog sleeps in my room as well. So yeah, I can't see a problem with that in terms of the escape.
Well, thank you very much for your insight, Tony. We've reached the end of our show.
Okay.
If anyone has any information, please check out the website, the Guelph.ca website under Fire Services, I believe it's called. There's lots of information there you can check out, and Tony's given us lots of things to think about. And I'd like to thank you very much for all your work and all your colleagues, that keep us safe and protected. We really appreciate that.
Thank you, Alex. It was my utmost pleasure speaking with you and all your listeners.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone. And again, if anyone has any topics they'd like to talk about, please send me an email at info@stone-road.com. To my attention, Alex Fullick, and we'll see if we can get something on the show for you. Thanks, everyone. And you've been listening to Preparing for the Unexpected. Stay prepared, everyone. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave a message and let me know what your thoughts are. If you'd like to be a guest on the show to talk about something related to business continuity, disaster management, COVID, personal well-being, anything that's relatable to those subjects, you can reach me through my LinkedIn profile, which is in the video description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe. In the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.